Okay. All right.
All right, we are live. Well, good afternoon, everyone in Facebook land, YouTube, Periscope land. This is another Clergy Conversations, and today we have a very, very special guest. One of God's great preachers, one of God's great thinkers and scholars, and like I told him before, one whom we all look up to, even though he laughed and we joked about it. But I'm so grateful to have Reverend Dr. Robert Charles Scott, the proud pastor of the St. Paul Baptist Church of Charlotte, North Carolina, to be our special guest today. So, Dr. Scott, we're grateful to have you. Introduce yourself to the people.
Yeah. Well, Pastor Brown, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to share with you and all of those that are connected with you. It is my deep honor and privilege to have been asked to just have conversation. And I think that this is so necessary. And the wonderful thing in today's society is that technology affords an opportunity for us to do a multiplicity of things that we weren't able to do when I was coming through.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, with social media, it has its positives, and even though it has its negatives, if you play it right, the positive outweigh the negative. And so this is just another opportunity for us to share with you all and honor, pouring into the next generation, just as it was with me.
Yes, sir. Well, I appreciate that. Like I said, once again, Dr. Scott. So let me jump right into it. Just tell us just about yourself, your background. Tell us a little bit just about your background as we start this.
Where you want to start?
Well, we'll start where you're from. We'll start right there, the geographical location.
I'm 52 years old, so I'm like,
yes, sir.
Give me help like that. No, I was born in Chicago, Illinois.
Okay, Chi-Town.
Yeah, in Cook County Hospital, and stayed there until I was about 8 years old. My mother and my father are both from Mississippi. And so even though I was born in Chicago, I really grew up in Mississippi.
Okay.
And a little town called Monticello, Mississippi. Monticello is so small, if you sneeze, blink, or cough, you will miss it.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm
sir.
serious. You will miss it.
All right.
Small town. I accepted my calling at a very early age, or as I like to say now in hindsight, what I perceived to be a calling. I did my initial sermon when I was 11.
Yes, sir.
I was licensed when I was 12 and ordained when I was 18 at the Oak Grove Missionary Baptist Church in Monticello, Mississippi. The pastor that ordained me, he now sleeps in a Mendenhall grave in Mendenhall, Mississippi. His name is Reverend Eddie McDowell.
Okay.
And while Reverend McDowell was not highly educated, I think
sir.
Reverend McDowell may have completed the 8th grade. He was a person that was really anointed by God and believed that the Lord had something for me to do. So he accepted my call. And the interesting thing is I preached on the 4th Sunday of November 1979. I didn't get a license until a year later. Okay. So, unlike, most preachers, they get their license as soon as they preach. I didn't get a license until a year later.
Wow.
So with that, I learned how to do pastoral care under him. He used to go and visit the sick after church on Sunday. And we were a 2 Sunday church at the time.
Okay.
So he and his wife would come in from McGee, Mississippi, and he would preach. And then afterwards, he would go to my auntie's house or to some other member's house, have Sunday dinner. He would take me with him. And I literally got to see what folks used to trip about whenever the preacher came over and how they would lay out the spread for the preacher.
Right.
And Reverend McDowell and his wife, they always got the first plates.
I know that's right.
so I rolled with him because I knew I was going to get me a good meal. But then afterwards, he would go to the hospital.
Okay.
He would go, to visit those that are sick and shut in before he left the community. And I learned that as a boy,
Yes, sir.
what pastoral care was all about. So then he left our church, and the church called a gentleman by the name of Dr. Ellie McEwen. And he was from a place called Magnolia, Mississippi, right below home. Near Macomb, rather. And so Reverend McDonald was the one that really instilled in me about going to school, getting an education, and things of that sort. Now, I'll be honest, being a pastor was nowhere on my agenda. I thought become an engineer.
Yes, sir.
And when I went to Jackson State, I pursued a pre-math engineering degree. And when I got to a course called differential equations, I discovered that 1 + 1 didn't equal 2.
Absolutely.
And so then I shifted to political science pre-law.
Yes, sir.
And did that and graduated from Jackson State. And I took the LSAT to go to law school. And if there was a way of flunking the LSAT, I invented it. I invented it. My score was so horrible to this day. The only folks that know what I made are me, the Lord, and the folks who scored it.
I know that's right.
Go to soul what I made on my exam,
right.
but
we ain't asking either. We're not gonna ask that question.
It was horrible, and
yes, sir.
I didn't know what I was gonna do. I mean, I had a real good run at Jackson State. I was student body president, well known, highly respected, and didn't know what I was gonna do. And lo and behold, I was talking with my dad, my biological father, one day, and he said, "Boy," "how long you been preaching?" At that time, maybe about 10 years. He said,
"Okay,
maybe you need to go to seminary."
Wow!
And I was like, the Lord telling my, using my dad, So I applied to Harvard, Yale, and Duke.
Okay,
I got accepted to all three, and I went to Duke because it was closer to Mississippi, and I had a girlfriend back in Mississippi that I could make a 12-hour drive to see whenever I wanted to. So it's amazing. It's amazing how the Lord uses our silliness,
right,
to put us where He wants us to be. So I did 3 years at Duke, and then after that, I pursued the doctoral degree at United Theological Seminary. And by the time I was 29, I had to earn D-Min.
Yes.
So, so that from an academic perspective is kind of sort of where I am. I am at my fourth church. St. Paul is the fourth church that I pastored. The first church was in Durham while I was in seminary at Duke. Right. And it was a UCC church.
Okay.
Iron Temple United Church of Christ. And I was there for 3 years while I was in seminary. Then I came back to my Baptist roots after I graduated from seminary, and pastored a church in Lexington, North Carolina, called Union Baptist Church. Now, what's so interesting about Lexington is that back in the day, the majority of the furniture made in America was made in what is called the Furniture Triangle area, which is Thomasville, Lexington, and High Point.
Wow.
60% of America's furniture was made in that area during that time. So I was in the mix of all of that.
Wow.
I pastored Union Baptist for 4 years, and then got called to Central Baptist in St. Louis. And I served there for 17 years, and then came here to Charlotte, and I'm going into my 5th year now here at St. Paul Baptist Church.
Wow. So, Dr. Scott, let me ask you this question. When you said you started at 11, then you didn't get your license to 12. Through that year and being a boy preacher, if you will, how was that experience growing up as a boy preacher, and then, like say, waiting to get your license at 12? How was that experience? Did you feel like an outsider? Did you feel that you were were people always watching you? Like, how was that experience?
Well, that's a good question. In the sense that there are several things that grounded me during that particular time. I think number one, me not getting the license was a foot grounder.
Okay.
In the sense that I didn't know any better.
Absolutely.
I didn't know that I was preaching to get a license.
Right.
And the sermon that I preached, oh gosh, It was the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Mm.
I came from Matthew 27. Now, the interesting thing is, I was clueless. I had to stand on the milk crate for them to see me. I was clueless about what I was doing.
Yes, sir.
Church was packed. I mean, folks everywhere. And my sister, I talked for about 45 minutes. But the folks stayed, blessed their hearts. When I look back at it, I'm going like, Lord, that had to be just a pain on their ears. What I know now. I thank God not only for his grace, but I thank God for gracing people with grace.
Yes, sir.
But I had a mother and her first husband that really allowed for me to grow up as normal as possible.
Right.
So what is meant by that is, I mean, I played sports.
Yes, sir.
You know, because interestingly, during that time, people felt with me being a boy preacher, I shouldn't be playing sports. Couldn't wear shorts and stuff like that. Right. And my mom was like, y'all better leave him alone. You know, so
absolutely.
So I played basketball up to my sophomore year in college. I was in the band.
Yes, sir.
I did a lot of extracurricular activities. So I had as much of a normal childhood as possible. I think, Pastor Brown, that my calling and me accepting my calling at such an early age preserved me until I really got to a place where I understood what all this stuff, what this calling was really about. And what do I mean by that? So with me being a boy preacher, there were just certain things that folks wouldn't invite me to or would let me do because I was the boy preacher. I remember one of my favorite great uncles, he died a few years ago, and I used to go spend the night with him. And he was just from my father's side, he was just that connection that I had to my dad's side. And his son, who is one of my favorite cousins, was just, you know, the ladies' girl. I mean, the ladies' guy. I mean, the girls love me. I wanted to tag behind him. Right. And mom was like, no, you ain't following him. No, you staying here. Right. You know, just certain things I couldn't do. I couldn't go to the club, you know. Right. Because I'm the boy preacher. So it's just certain things that I couldn't do because of this calling.
Absolutely.
And even when I got to college, you know, I think my first year at Jackson State, and I thank the Lord for his grace. I ain't go to church. I was like, I'm tired of this. I ain't doing this no more. Right. And so my first year, I was buck wild. I was just crazy. But then that catches up with you, and the word got out. Well, you know, you're a preacher and all that stuff. And so it got out. And when I ran for freshman class president, folks knew it was something different about me by the way I spoke and all that. Good. So, you know, you can try to pull a Jonah if you want to. Eventually it catches up. Right. Yes, sir. You. And that's what kind of happened with me. But I was blessed, though, to have parents that kind of allow for me within certain parameters. Yes, sir. To, you know, be as typical of a teenager as possible. I never forget something my mom used to say. And that was, she said, now in that pulpit, you belong to the Lord. But once you come out that pulpit, you belong to me. Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So then what did you learn from the preaching aspect from your first pastor? You talked about he drove you around and you were with him. But what did you learn just by watching him as a preacher? How did your preaching in those early years just develop watching your pastor?
Well, I think that Reverend Eddie McDonald as well as Reverend McEwen.
Yes, sir.
Dr. McEwen, they were influential in what I would say putting up some protective guardrails.
Okay.
And I say that in the sense that those protective guardrails, in hindsight, were good for me.
Yes, sir.
So me not getting a license to preach my first year.
Yes, sir.
Meant that I could not be some wild Mustang whenever somebody called. You know, but I really had to ask my pastor. You know,
yes, sir.
So and so want me to do this. And I think I may have preached once or twice prior to getting my license to preach.
Right.
But even then, after I got my license to preach, my pastor explained to me, this is really a license only for you to preach here at this church. If you ever read your license, that's really what it's for, to preach at that church,
Absolutely.
to work at that church, and so you really need to get permission if you go out, because your pastor's trying to protect you from things. So, and so I was appreciative of that. And I would not say that my first pastor was high on scholarship.
Okay.
More so than he was on this strict interpretation of the word of God as he felt the Lord gave it to him.
Absolutely.
Okay. So that's kind of what I got from, but he now I have to admit, he had an interesting anointing about him.
Yes, sir.
And when folks tried to mess with him, I saw for myself how the Lord dealt with them.
My goodness. My goodness.
Yeah, he was that kind of dude. My second pastor, Reverend Ellie McEwen, had a high regard or a high esteem for scholarship, and he ran this little seminary. It wasn't accredited.
Okay.
But I would go to his classes. Now, I'll be honest, I didn't appreciate it at the time. I'm like, what is this?
Right.
I didn't appreciate it at the time, but in hindsight, it kind of started laying the track.
Yes, sir.
For where I am now. So as far as preaching is concerned, you mimic folks. I mean, one of my for Reverend McDonald, one of his favorite phrases were, "Ain't God all right?" Yeah.
Right.
So
yes,
I was speaking, I was going like, "Ain't God all right?" Yeah.
Right.
And,
yes, sir.
And Dr. Ellie McEwen just go, "Duh, the Lord said it, duh," and So
Absolutely.
you mimic you mimic what you see, and that's kind of what I did until I got to college, and really then my horizon just exploded as far as really what was out there, to a greater degree than what it was when I was in my hometown.
Okay, so Pastor Scott, talk to us about when you were going in college. You say you talked about Duke University. Who were some of those voices that you began to gravitate towards or that really made you, as you talk about this wider perspective? Who were those voices that you listened to that really made you take preaching seriously, but also even the scholarship seriously? Who were some of those voices?
That's a great question. When I was in my mid-teens, like about 15, 16, 17. Somebody gave me a book by William Watley and Sam Proctor, and I read that. And then I was exposed to Gardner Taylor. And while I was reading their books, appreciating the language.
Yes, sir.
Not really able to connect the homiletical dots, but just reading it, I was just blown away, And of course, I knew I was nowhere near that. When I got to seminary, the saving grace for my seminary experience at Duke was connecting with the late Reverend Dr. Samuel DeWitt Proctor.
Yes, sir.
He came to Duke to my last 2 years, and he was a professor that they brought him on as a visiting professor. So I got church administration from him, ethics from him, preaching from him. In fact, his book, The Certain Sound of a Trumpet, my work is in that. We were the guinea pigs.
Wow.
For his book. And I was in his first preaching class. It was 6 of us.
Yes, sir.
And I was in his first preaching class. And so, like I said, we were the guinea pigs for that book. So he has a footnote to his fall 93 preaching class in that book, because he took our works and incorporated it in the book. So I got my homiletical handles.
Yes, sir.
From him. And I use what I call the Proctor method, the Hegelian, the dialectical method. I swear by that. the first book that I have any preacher that starts under me to understand about preaching is that book. And so Proctor really redeemed my Duke experience. And what I mean by that is I spent 3 years at Duke, but I never got immersed at Duke. And what do I mean by that? Duke is a United Methodist school. It was predominantly white. There were times I did not feel like I fit in. And I never forget my first semester, I almost quit. I had a roommate who died from a heart attack. I had my grandmother, who I lived with during my high school years. She died. And my roommate, when he died, I didn't know how I was going to pay the rent on my apartment. I was making $210 every 2 weeks from work study. Rent was $4.
Oh, Lord.
And so, I didn't know how I was going to make it. And I never forget, I called the executive vice president at Jackson State at that time. Her name was Dr. Susan LaFonetta Jones Allen.
Yes, sir.
And I talked to her, and she said, "You're not going to quit. You are graduated from Jackson State. You're not going to quit." To this day, I still have the 4 withdrawal slips that the dean of academic affairs at Duke gave me, because he suggested that I should withdraw.
Wow.
And I'm glad that I didn't. So Sam Proctor was one of my redeeming qualities. He really made my experience at Duke worthwhile. The other one was Willie Jennings.
Yes, sir.
Willie Jennings, he's at Yale now, but I had him for what is called Christian anthropology.
Christian anthropology. Okay.
And he was just absolutely incredible and just a great thinker. And then the other course that I think had a lot of bearing with me was what we call CM10. I had, at that time, he was Dean William Willimon and Dr. William Turner.
Yes,
and
sir.
That was the introduction to Christian ministry. When it came to those biblical courses,
I know what you mean. I'm telling you.
Yeah. And then the other thing is that I was pastoring.
Yes, sir.
Carrying the full load. So I was pastoring, carrying a full load at Duke. Interestingly, what a lot of folks don't know is that when I got to Durham, I hooked up with this church called Orange Grove Baptist Church.
Okay.
And the pastor there was, and he really had a great impact on how I do worship, how I frame, ministry, how I do pastoral ministry. His name is Reverend Dr. Carl Kinney.
Yes, sir.
So Carl Kinney is the reason why I started pastoring in seminary. Now, Carl Kinney's, let me tell you who his associates were. These were his associates. I don't know if you ever heard of a PhD scholar named Craig Keener.
No, I have not.
Okay, Craig Keener is one of the preeminent New Testament scholars in the country.
Okay.
White guy, married to an African. He's blacker than me and you, but smart as a whip, a New Testament scholar par excellence. I can call Craig right now and say, Craig, give me 1 John 1:2 in the ESV version. He can quote it word for word from memory.
Wow.
It's just that absolute brilliant. So he had Craig Keener, Howard John Wesley.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
We were his associates.
Wow.
And Howard John was in undergrad at Duke. Craig Keener was doing PhD New Testament at Duke. I was doing the MDill. And all 3 of us at that time were his associate ministers. So, and he had the fastest growing church at that time in the Raleigh-Durham area.
Wow.
So, it was fun. And so Carl kicked me out. He was like, you need a pastor. And he recommended me to this small UCC church that was right around the corner from his church. And so I started pastoring there midway through my second semester at Duke.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So Dr. Scott, encourage us as young preachers and young pastors about the importance of school and the importance of furthering our education, especially when we're talking about seminary education.
Well, I never forget something that Dr. Proctor said to me. And for those that aren't familiar with Dr. Proctor, let me see if I can just give a little sketchy background for him. Dr. Proctor is probably one of the most, he was one of the most preeminent scholar pastors that the African American church produced.
Yes, sir.
He was on the level of a Benjamin E. Mays. And Dr. Proctor was president at Virginia Union.
Mm-hmm.
He was dean at Virginia Union. Then he became president of North Carolina A&T. And he was president when Jesse Jackson was at A&T and when they had the famous boycott at Woolworth.
Yes, sir.
So he was president of A&T at that time. Then he became the first African-American associate director of the Peace Corps. And then after that, he became the pastor. He followed Adam Clayton Powell Jr. at Abyssinia.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
And he was there from, I want to say from 72 to 87.
Okay.
So while he was pastoring at Abyssinia, he also was a professor at Rutgers in their School of Education.
Wow.
So he had 1 foot in the academy, 1 foot in the church, and of course also served as a visiting professor at various schools and seminaries across the width and breadth of this land. And so he was this perfect hybrid model of scholar pastor, not scholar preacher, scholar pastor. Because even though he did all of that, he pastored Abyssinian Baptist Church and he empowered people. So when it comes to education, I think that what we have to understand is that anointing is very important. You can have education, but if you don't have anointing, you know, there's going to be this great misfire. You're going to miss out on some things. However, God does God's best work whenever you put something else in the cup. So, for example, I tell people, I say, you cannot expect for the Lord to give you something that you haven't striven for.
Wow.
And what I mean by that is, you know, it's like you having a test, a math test, and you haven't opened up your book to study, and you want the Lord to give you the answers. Well, God can do that.
Right.
But 9.9 times out of 10, God ain't gonna do that.
Right.
You know, it's like what Jesus says when Jesus says that the Holy Spirit will bring things to your remembrance what I have told you.
My goodness.
Okay. So God has a way of bringing things to your remembrance of what you have put in.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Whether you've heard it, whether you've read it, whether you've seen it, God takes what you have.
Yes, sir.
And then, you know, magnifies it in an exponential way. Mm-hmm. And so the more of what we have that we surrender to God, the more that God can do with those offerings that we give to God. So I tell folks that if you're going to take your calling to ministry seriously, you're called to a life of the mind.
Wow. The life of the mind. Wow.
The life of the mind, which means that you're called really to do a lot of reading, reflecting, putting things into your mental reservoir for the Lord to work with.
Absolutely.
And the more that you expose yourself to, the more the Lord has to work with.
Absolutely.
And so I think that when it comes to scholarship, when it comes to school, you go to school not so you can brag about how many degrees you have. You go to school to get these tools.
Yes,
And
sir.
particularly seminary has a way of framing your mind to think theologically.
Yes, sir.
It just doesn't happen. There has to be a framing of your cognitive consciousness
Yes,
to
sir.
think a certain way. So when you go to school, when you've been exposed to exegesis and hermeneutics and biblical interpretation and how to look at different texts or how to approach texts and situations theologically or ethically, your mind has been framed to look at things differently than the normal layperson.
My goodness.
And because of that, then you're able to um, expound upon matters from a different perspective than the normal person that sits up in your church on Sunday morning listening to you preach or teach. So seminary is very important in framing your mind. And then Proctor used to tell me, eat the meat and spit out the bones.
Mm-hmm.
And what he meant by that is that everything that you gain in seminary is profitable to you, but it may not be profitable to your people.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And what's meant by that is that whatever you get in seminary, you use it to put within the language of the people a way that can stretch and expand their understanding of who God is. So I know in my preaching, I can't go into the church and if I'm preaching from Exodus or Genesis, talk about the JEPD doctrine, they're gonna look at me like, huh? That's for my own edification. I mean,
right.
they don't, they want to know, well, did God really get them through the Red Sea? Yeah, right. God did, and you bring to bear the insights and the undertones of how God moved among forces that were with God as well as forces that were against God, but it was all working because of the sovereignty of God. And so that type of exposure gives you the opportunity to really stretch people and their imagination and their capacity and their thinking about who God is.
Yes, sir. So, Dr. Scott, let me ask you this question. When you talked about reading, what are, from your experience, how do you develop a strong library?
Whew. You go to seminary, you're going to develop a strong library.
Right. Absolutely.
You go to seminary. I have here at St. Paul, I got 1, 2, 3. I think I got four of my ministers are in school.
Wow.
And I told them, I said, now, I said, you're going to develop a library, from one of my students is at Duke. Okay. I told him, I said, don't be surprised that in your first semester, you're going to have to buy anywhere between 30 to 36 books. You're like, huh? I said, trust me, that's going to be on par every semester. So, as we say back in Mississippi, he didn't believe fat meat's greasy. And so, he said, am I expected to read all this? I said, you were expected to read something from all of those books.
Absolutely.
And you getting ready to learn how to read differently, and you're getting ready to learn how to write differently, and you're getting ready to learn how to analyze differently. And so, I built my library really from seminary, and there then became I got this desire. I became a bookophile.
Right.
Where I just, I see something that piques my interest and I'll get it. So I know that nowadays, because of ebooks and access, you can have a very extensive library. So I would probably say, like, at home, at my home library, I probably got about 1,500 books.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. Now, on my digital library, I got about 18,000.
Wow. So how many books do you read a week?
Right now, well, I put it like this. I read from about 3 to 4 different disciplines at a time. So
Okay.
I'm usually reading um, several books um, at the same time, and those books kind of feed my soul as far as thinking and processing. But it's not always totally seminary, if I can, kind of say that. So I've been reading a book on the ones that I have open now, of course, is Barack Obama's A Promised Land. I'm
Yes,
reading
sir.
After Whiteness by Willie Jennings, who was my professor at Duke. I'm reading the book Black Suffering by James Harris, who's at Virginia Union. And then I also got open a book called The Spiritual Danger of Donald Trump.
Wow.
Those are kind of the 4 books I'm plowing through right now. And that is, I hadn't too long finished reading Reading While Black by Esau Macaulay. And that's a very, very rich book that Dr. Macaulay has done that gives us a different hermeneutical and interpretive lens as far as reading the Bible. And,
Yes,
and in a way, because interestingly, he comes from a conservative background, him to deal with the issue of he does it in a very subtle way as far as critical race theory is concerned, which interestingly, the Southern Baptists are clowning on.
Absolutely. So with all, I mean, we're gonna have to text you after this to get a whole book list since you got all these book lists to read. So then talk to us about your past. You say you started in college, sophomore in college.
Well, no, I started pastoring my second year. Second semester at Duke when I was in seminary.
Okay, yeah. So so talk to us church, and then just transition to the next church, and then of course the central. How was the experience?
Well, at my first church, like I said, it was a small United Church of Christ.
Right.
It was a family church, and I loved that church. They were just very, very wonderful to me. I love that church. Zion Temple United Church of Christ, and 508 Sparilla Street, Durham, North Carolina, 27705. I remember zip code. At that church, they were very gracious with me because I didn't know what I was doing. So I go in.
Right.
I go in as I think at the time I had just turned 22. First church. The first Sunday I preached there because their pastor had left. And the first Sunday I preached there as an interim. It was 12 people there. I remember it like it was just, I counted them, 12 folks there. Now this church probably seated about 80 people, but it was 12 people there. Mm-hmm. And I never forget, the chair of the trustees came up to me and he gave me a check for $65. Yes, and these were his words to me: "Don't cash it before Wednesday." I'm like, are you serious? Yes, don't cash it before Wednesday. I was like, okay. I didn't cash it before Wednesday. So I went there that one Sunday. They asked me to come back the following Sunday. I went back and kept going back until, they basically, I think I was a de facto interim pastor for 3 years because we never really, in all honesty, we never really formalized, me being installed or anything like that. Wasn't none of that. I was just there for 3 years, and they were calling me there. Right. So that church, they were very, very gracious to me. I made some blunders along the way. I discovered how real the Holy Ghost is along the way. Because here I am, I'm this kid. I never forget one of my first encounters as far as church power dynamics were concerned was one time I had the deacons. I had this pastor aid club, and they wanted to do something for me. And one of the deacons told him, said, you don't do nothing for him unless you run it by us. That's what he told the president. And the president was like his cousin.
Oh.
So, he come to me. I said, well, no. I said, I'm the pastor. If I need anything, I'll let you know, or you can come to me. You ain't got to go through the deacons. So I never forget. I remember just like it was yesterday, Chris. I preached that one Sunday. And at that time, and I used to wear a robe. I preached. We had 5 people to join church. So I was on cloud 9. I mean, because if you could just get one person to join church of that size, that was euphoric. I had 5 that Sunday. I was like on cloud 9.
Right.
I come out, and the chair of the said, "We need to see you in the office." I said, "Okay." I said, "Okay." So I greeted a couple of folks. Yeah, I went downstairs to the office. I go into the office, and they're sitting around, standing around. It was about 8 of them. And so the chair of the deacon said, we got some issues here with you. And I said, well, what is it? He said, it was told to us that the person for the pastor aid said, we don't tell them what to do, that you need something, they can come to you or you can go to them. I said, yeah. And so then one of the deacons, his name, well, I won't call his name because I don't know who's watching. I don't want this to be in. He got up, and I was sitting down, and he came around to my side of the desk, and he put his finger in my face like this, and he said, "Who you think you are? You young whippersnapper from Duke, trying to come in here and tell us what to do?" I mean, he was just going off. And at that moment, I discovered the Holy Ghost is real. and I stood up. And I looked straight ahead and I said, "Sir, don't raise your voice at me and don't point your finger at me." I said, "You respect the office of pastor." I said, if there's not anything else for you all to say, you all can leave my office at this time. I said, "But we will not have this conversation ever again." And one of the deacons afterwards came up to me and said, "Pastor, today you grew 10 feet in my eyesight." And I said to him, "Well, why you ain't standing up for me?" Now, like I said, at that moment, the Holy Spirit had me. But when I got home, I got hot as fish grease, thinking about what had happened to me. Oh man, I was livid. So it's moments like that where you start, getting your pastoral handles, and you realize how you have to at times assert yourself through the power of the Holy Spirit, not to put folks down, but to dissuade rather the tyranny of folks who think they should be running the pastor. And so I got that lesson at an early age. And in every church that I've gone into, it's always been someone or somebodies that have tried to push those buttons, and you discover how real the Holy Spirit is. And that was one of the things that I kind of got my pastoral heft at that time at an early age. So at that church, once I did that, I didn't have hardly any issues. Then I got called to this church in Lexington, North Carolina, Union Baptist, which is, I went there, and as soon as I got there, there were several things that had happened to me. Number one, I had gotten married. And I started a doctoral program, and I lived 90 miles away from the church.
Oh, wow. Ooh,
okay. Let me say it again. Started a doctoral program in another state, Ohio. Lived 90 miles from the church, had just gotten married, the previous September and then came to this church the following June. So that church, Union Baptist, was wonderful to me. They were very supportive of me. Sam Proctor installed me at that church.
Awesome.
And I never will forget something he said at my installation, which still bears with me today. I'm sitting up there with my wife of less than a year, and he's getting ready to install me. He's preached this sermon from Exodus chapter 3. The subject was standing on holy ground. And in his introductory remarks, this is what he said. He said, I met Robert Charles Scott while he was a student at Duke. I became his advisor, his mentor. He used to come pick me up from the airport, and I learned about him, and everything he's gone after, he's gotten. Student vice president at Jackson State, graduate of Duke, getting ready to start his doctoral degree. He said, but he will not be the preacher and the pastor that God will have for him to be until he's had his heart broken.
Wow.
And I'm going like, I'm like, wow. Yeah, that's how I was. I was like, wow, well, interestingly, my heart did get broken. My first wife, we wound up getting a divorce. And part of it is my fault in the sense that I live 90 miles from the church. I was going to this church 2 to 3 times a week, not including Sundays. I was working on a doctoral program, and I did not have the opportunity. I didn't really make the timely investment into the relationship that I should have.
Right.
And so, she was competing against the church, competing against school. So I never forget, April 15, 1998, I came home from the church, and she was packing up her last pair of shoes on the moving van.
Wow. My goodness.
And that church loved me through that moment. They loved me through that divorce. So, in hindsight, I see the role that I played. It wasn't, any type of infidelity or
right. Yes, sir.
Like that. But, I did not make the investment that was necessary as far as that was concerned. So, so in hindsight, I lived and learned. And so they loved me through that. And then Central Baptist.
Yes, sir.
I called to Central Baptist in 99. And it was just after I signed the papers for my divorce.
Oh, wow.
That Central reached out to me. The interesting thing about that is I did not fit their original criteria. They were looking for someone that was 40 years old, married, with 2.5 kids and a dog.
Really?
I had gone through a divorce, didn't have no kids, and kicked the dog out. So, I never had a dog, but
right.
So I did not meet their original criteria, but they came down to Lexington, spied me out, and went back to the church and said, listen, he doesn't fit the criteria, but if this is what you all want, you got to change criteria. So interestingly, at Central, they called the person that fit the criteria.
Right.
And the person that fit the criteria didn't come. He rejected them.
Wow.
So then they called me, and they took a vote. I went there to preach, got the vote. I didn't give them an answer until 7 weeks later.
Wow.
Had prayer and went and met with the people and because Central Baptist at that time was really kind of still known as the Silk Stocking Church, even though those days had passed. But it was a very historic church in the St. Louis area, really in the Midwest. And I was the youngest person that they've ever called as pastor.
Wow.
And I was single.
My goodness.
So they took a chance on me. And so when I accepted the call, I went there single. I met my wife while I was in St. Louis. my current wife, and we got married. And I stayed there for 17 years. So I have the third longest pastoral tenure in that church's 177th year of existence.
Wow.
No, 100. I think that 100 and well, it'll be it'll be 165 this year. It'll be 160. No, 175 this year.
Okay.
It started in 1846, March 26, 1846.
Wow.
So I was there for 17 years. And the Lord let us do some great work there. We did some significant turns, and
Yes,
and so then I got called to St. Paul. And the interesting thing about getting called to St. Paul was I felt like I had done what I could, because I was kind of coasting at Central, I was kind of coasting at Central. And but we were doing fine, and had brought Central a long way. Did some major renovations and uplifts. I passed us through a crisis where we were out the church for about 16 months because of storm damage and stuff like that. And really gave the church a new look. We branded it, all that stuff. So I was asked to apply to St. Paul.
Okay.
And I gave it consideration. Now, St. Paul had been pastored by, I call him my big brother, but he's really a friend beloved, Dr. Gregory Keith Moss. Yeah. And they did not do a national search. They reached out to about 9 of us that they wanted to apply. Because if they had done a national search, it would have been about 400 something resumes they had.
Absolutely.
But they had 5 pastors that the church trusted, give them names of persons to pursue. And 2 of the pastors gave my name.
Wow.
And so, I applied. They dwindled it down to 3. 3 of us did like a Skype interview. They dwindled it down to 2. 2 of us were invited to come to do an in-person interview. 2 of us were invited to come preach. And then they took one name to the church. They took my name to the church. And out of the that day, they did an in-person vote. And out of the 1,500 folks that were here at the church, they had them, to stand and, if they wanted me to be the pastor. And they had folks that didn't want me to be the pastor. I think probably out of 1,500 folks, 40 people didn't want me to be the pastor.
Wow. So you got a real unanimous call.
Yeah. And so I came to St. Paul following really, and I have 2 living pastor emeriti, Paul Drumming, who built the current sanctuary, and then Dr. Gregory Maltz. And both of them I have a great relationship with. I consult them for insight. They respect me as their pastor. I love them dearly. And prior to the pandemic, I allow for each one of them to, whenever, to preach, and things of that sort. I try to do whatever I can to support them. If they want to go to different conferences or conventions, I do that. I give them the deference because I stand on their shoulders, and I'm building on what they had done in the past. The blessing for me here at St. Paul is, first of all, St. Paul is a mission-minded church, great people, wonderful, just the potential is off the charts. But I came here and I stepped into an $18 million building project for a housing development. So Dr. Moss had laid the plans through our CDC, but I was the one that had to carry the ball across the goal.
Yes, sir.
And we lost parking during that building because we built it on our parking lots in the neighborhood. But we built 112 units of housing for senior citizens and affordable income. But that put some gray hair on me because, and I told the board, they said, "Oh, we'll be in so. I said, "No, you won't." I said, "Add 9 months to it," and God knows I was right. And that project, it was any building project, whatever the folks tell you. Just if you add another year to it, you won't be disappointed. That's what I've discovered in 2 building projects.
So
Because,
don't rush building projects. Don't
well,
rush.
it's not even a matter of rushing.
Uh-huh.
If they say one thing, just add 6 to 9 months to it,
Right.
because
Yes, sir.
something is bound to happen.
Yes, sir.
And if they come in underneath that time, then shout, give God glory, as well as his black mama Mary.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, but it was very challenging.
Yes, sir.
So I stepped into that. The blessing for me was that I brought two of my people from St. Louis with me. I
Okay.
brought my administrator and my executive assistant. And that kind of put me ahead of the
Right.
curve pastorally.
Right. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Because I had two people in key positions that knew how I thought. I didn't have to train them.
Right.
But everybody else had to get used to how I do things.
Absolutely.
I didn't have to get them used to it. So they could kind of be sort of like the buffer for me. But then the other thing is, this pandemic has now sped up my opportunity to become pastor. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is, you never waste a crisis.
Yes, sir.
This pandemic, because people are looking for the pastor along with key leaders to make decisions, to give focus, to keep the ship moving forward. And because when I came here, I lost a lot of pastoral capital. When I was at Central, I was the pastor.
Right. Right.
You're the pastor. I mean, and I guided us through a crisis. I was the pastor. I mean, it was just certain things that, for the most part, they weren't going to question it. Right. But when you come here, it's like you got to prove yourself over and over again. You got to get to know, who the players are, who, influential, what the sacred cows are, what can you mess with, what can't you mess with, and things of that sort. And I was, even though I love Dr. Moss, I was, for some people, I never measure up because I wasn't him and things of that sort. And you have to have the heart of a shepherd and the hide of a rhinoceros. And so with that, I just had to be sure in what I know that the Lord,
yes, sir,
has called me to do. And that I am. So it's been a marvelous journey, but it's not my intention. It's not my intention, as long as the Lord gives me health, life, and strength, to die being the pastor of St. Paul.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I'm 52.
Yes,
I ain't
sir.
trying to do this in my 70s and 80s.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So then let me ask you this, and I'm gonna ask you a couple more questions because I know you're busy schedule. You've been more than gracious with your time. How do you, when you talked about you were coasting? So when you were talking about you're coasting at Central? So encourage a pastor who may feel like they're at that place where it's like they're here, but they feel like they've done all they can do. So how did you get through that season? What was the process, or is it wrong for somebody to start looking for something else, like sending a resume off, even though they're being faithful where they are, but they also feel another direction? So what would be some of your advice to a pastor who feels that they are kind of stuck, if you will?
That's a good question. And it's going to be different for each person based upon their situations. I mean, I believe that the Lord allows for who God wants to be in a certain place if it's not forced to be there.
Yes, sir.
What do I mean by that? Prior to coming to St. Paul, my name had been mentioned, and I was asked to apply at another prominent church. And I applied. Interestingly, the pulpit committee was getting ready to come look at me, and we had a storm damage. Tornado ripped off the roof at Central. And I could not, in good faith, leave them at that time. So I withdrew.
Wow.
I withdrew. I wasn't going to do that. I mean, I really have a shepherd's heart. So I can't do that.
Yes,
So
sir.
I withdrew. And so the Lord has a way of positioning you
Right.
where you need to be. So that was a move that could have happened back in 2006, 2007.
Wow.
You know, because here was my estimation, Chris. I was gonna come. I come to St. Louis, and the word on the street in St. Louis was I wouldn't even last 3 years.
Mm.
My own estimation was I'm only gonna be here for 5 and I'm gone.
Yes, sir.
And
Yes, sir.
I wind up staying for 17 years.
Yes, sir.
I understand for 17 years. And so, but I had gotten to a point where, I was close. And this is what I recommend, because I think that part of the coast, if I can say that, was the fact that I really didn't take time off like I needed to.
Okay.
I think that if I had taken like a sabbatical,
Mhm.
a couple of months or 3 months away, that probably would have given me a major refreshment and a major reframing. It doesn't mean that I still would be there,
Right.
but I probably would not have been, quote, coasting. I probably would have come back with a sense of invigoration.
Right.
And so one of the wonderful things I have built into my covenant with St. Paul is that I've been here for going on my 5th year. My 7th year, I'm taking a sabbatical for about 3 months. And we're looking at how we're going to fund that sabbatical.
Mhm.
But when I take my sabbatical, I'm going to do what I want to do.
Absolutely.
If I want to travel, I'm going to travel. My daughter, who is now 11, going on 22, really be intentional about spending time with my family and stuff like that. But even now, St. Paul pushes me to do that, because my pastor, Greg Malls, my predecessor, retired because of depression.
My goodness. My goodness.
Severe depression.
My goodness.
And the doctor said, "Do you want to live?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, you're gonna have to give up the church."
Wow.
And I ain't letting no church kill me.
Right.
Listen, they will listen. You die, and Sunrise gonna say, Pastor Brown was a good one. Bring on the next one.
Yes, sir. Wow.
So
Yes, sir.
you have to take care of yourself. So that's one of the things that I have been intentional about. And of course, I have a few friends who have done sabbaticals, and they said it was a major, major blessing. And if I had to do it all over again, as far as coming to St. Paul, I would have taken 3 months away before I started.
Really?
I left Central in September of 2016, and I was at St. Paul the first Sunday in October.
I remember seeing that on Facebook that happened. Yes, sir.
If I had to do it all over again, I probably would have started January.
Yes, sir.
Instead of October. I would have taken 3 months to because that's 17 years.
Right.
And you need to really disengage before you re-engage. And so, when I got here, I was still at times referring to St. Paul as Central. That's like calling the new woman by your old woman's name.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, doggone it, I'm sorry. But if I had to do it all over again, I would have taken, if my money would have been better. Let me just say that if my money would have been better, I would have taken 3 months off to breathe, and that could have been a quasi sabbatical before I entered into this new relationship. But I'm glad that if the Lord gives me health, life, and strength, that this is 2021. By 2023, 24, I'm going to take a sabbatical.
Yes, sir.
And 3 months away, and just really do a significant recharge. Yeah.
Yeah, yes, sir. Well, from the Facebook comments, you're helping a whole lot of pastors right now. I just want to let you know that a lot of pastors being helped by this conversation. So one thing you encourage me is that the way you honor your predecessor. So that I think that's very important because I've seen pastors who honor their predecessors. So just hit us for a minute in that about the importance of honoring the man that came, or the man or woman that came before you, honoring that previous pastor.
Well, again, I have two living predecessors.
Absolutely.
I have two
Right.
living predecessors, and I highly, highly respect them, highly revere them. I love them.
Yes, sir.
I mean, and they have been very, very gracious, very, very good to my family and me.
Yes, sir.
And so the way that I honor them, send them to conventions.
Yes, sir.
If I know that they're coming to church, I make sure that there is a parking space close by reserved for them.
Yes, sir.
At times I will have them to preach, and we make sure that their retirement is taken care of as much as possible.
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
So don't fight your predecessor, but honor your predecessor.
Why? Why are you gonna fight them? Even if, and I've seen some predecessors do some crazy things to their successors, but even if that, you got the mic.
Well,
and if the Lord gives you health, life, and strength, you got more years than they do.
Absolutely.
So why you want to do that? And see the wonderful thing, but here's the thing: my predecessors retired.
Right.
Okay. Some people's predecessors are forced out, or they resign, or something salacious or scandalous happened. But even with that, there's a way that you can celebrate the good things that they did, and still build on to what you were doing. The wonderful thing that I've had at St. Paul is that particularly my two living predecessors, they retired. One because in the Constitution at the time, that was a constitutional requirement, but they removed that. The other one because he wanted to live, and I maintain he could still be the pastor right now. And there are probably quite a few people that probably wish he was, but he could still be the pastor right now. But Dr. Moss is doing a lot better, and one of the things we talk about is you need a therapist. A pastor needs a therapist. You need somebody that you can talk to that can help you to navigate some of the stuff that you're dealing with,
right?
And so that you don't bleed on your people, or that you don't bash your people because you ain't dealing with your own stuff. And so I go see a therapist. I started seeing a therapist after my spiritual father, Charles Booth, died.
Yes, sir.
And then my dad, my biological father, died, and it's the best $180 per month that I spend.
Absolutely.
And I'm able to share within confidence, what I'm dealing with and what I like, what I don't like, and and things of that sort. And I know that it stays there,
right?
Because even with preachers, you got to be careful about what you share.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I think that's
have discretion.
Absolutely. And I think that's very important what you said with that. And I do have just two more questions, then Dr. I promise you I'll be done. But here's one question, because I followed your ministry. Like I said, you've always been an inspiration to me. And I've seen, your ministry navigate from Central to St. Paul. But I want to ask this question, and I believe you can very help us with this question. Because, there will be pastors and preachers that sometimes, even if we're not trying to, sometimes we can still look and have that comparison spirit. Like, I see what this guy has, but then I see what I have. It's like, I'm giving as much effort as this guy, or this pastor, this guy or female, but it's not coming back to me the same way. So just encourage us in that regard about not necessarily being so consumed with comparison.
There's a quote I read a few months ago, and I can't remember who wrote it or who said it, but it blessed me. And here's the quote: The enemy to joy and peace is comparison.
Wow. The enemy to joy and peace is comparison. My goodness. Wow. That's it. Wow. The enemy to joy and peace is comparison.
Mm-hmm. And so you got to become comfortable in your own skin. I got some, and these are friends. These are people I have on speed dial. Remember, I told you Howard John Wesley and I were associates together.
Yes, sir.
Another dear friend of mine is Dr. William Houston Curtis.
Yes, sir.
Folks used to get us confused at United, and we wind up calling each other twin. Howard John Wesley, Billy Curtis, Marcus Cosby, and back when I think it was this magazine that used to be called the African American Pulpit.
Yes, sir.
And back in the day, they had their top 20 preachers under 40 to watch, and everybody's trying to get on the list. I was on the original list.
Yes, sir.
Folks like me, Otis Moss, Marcus Cosby, John Adolph, Jasmine Skirlaw, and interestingly, folks that made that list ain't doing too bad. But the funny thing was that each of us on that list have varying degrees of how our ministry is looking, moving, and things like that. And so, coming up, it's natural for us to do the comparison thing.
Right.
Interesting is just part of our internal fallibility.
Yes,
to look and see what somebody else doing, but you don't know what they have gone through.
My goodness.
To achieve what they have.
Yes, sir.
And so you got to really become comfortable in your own skin. You got to become comfortable in you, and that is where I am. So, I celebrate, and any of my friends can tell you, I celebrate what God is doing as far as their life is concerned, as far as their ministries are concerned. I listen, I'm their biggest cheerleader.
Yes, sir.
And when I was younger, may have been doing this comparison thing, but the older you get, man, you come to the realization that the stuff you think you want, you don't know what it takes to keep it. And so
my goodness.
I'm content, because I know the pace in which I work and what God has allowed for me to have as far as scale is concerned. So in that vein, I'm not like I said, I can celebrate with a lot of my friends and shout over what they're doing because and really mean it because the Lord is doing a major thing in their lives.
Well, I appreciate that. And lastly, I just want to let's just talk about preaching. We can go a couple of ways. If you want to talk to us about just your preaching process for one, but also talk to us just about what encourages you, what kind of gives you what kind of discourages you about preaching right now. And just, because I know you're also, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you're also a preaching professor. So, when you look at preaching, what encourages and discourages you, but also just your process.
Well, let me clear up something. I have taught in the seminary.
Okay.
Dr. Charles Booth, Dr. Jesse Williams, and I did a doctoral group.
Okay.
Back in 2006 to 2008 or 9, something like that. And we took students through a doctoral where, the focus was prophetic preaching.
Yes, sir.
And then I did my doctoral work on using the Proctor method as a means of pastoral care of preaching in the African American church. But to say that I have like a PhD in preaching, I ain't gonna floss like that because that's nowhere near the truth.
Right.
But I do read a lot of books on preaching. I take preaching very seriously.
Yes, sir.
The best I could say, Pastor, is that I practice preaching.
Yes, sir.
Like a doctor practice medicine.
Mm-hmm.
We don't ever get it perfect.
Yes, sir.
It is real hard for the finite to preach about the sovereign goodness of the infinite in a
Mm.
perfect.
Mm.
My beloved frat brother, the late Dr. Caesar Clark, said that our best preaching is nothing but an embarrassing stammering.
Wow. Wow. My goodness. Wow.
And he was one of the best to do it.
Yes, sir.
So, so you know, I'm a constant student of it, and constant learner. And I got a lot of preachers that I love to listen to, and because of technology and the internet, um, you know, you can stream and download and check out, you know, whoever you want to. You can Google them and find, you know, sermons and things like that. But I think that for me, um, I have a penchant for the classics as well as the contemporary. So for me, when I think about classics, of course, Sam Proctor, Gardner Taylor, William Augustus Jones, H. Beecher Hicks,
Yes, sir.
um, Prathia Hall Wynne. And if you've never heard of her, you need to Google her. She has a sermon talking about between the wilderness and the cliff that will just tear you up. Iona Locke, who just died, was a strong woman of God. Claudette Copeland and Vashti McKenzie. Gina Stewart, you know, got a lot of males and females that I love to listen to. And, you know, as far as classics are concerned, then you have what I would consider to be my contemporaries that I love to hear. And some of those names I've already dropped, like William Curtis, Howard John Wesley, um, again, Gina Stewart, sister named Shalita Fumby, Jasmine Skurlock, Jacqueline Thompson. I mean, it's a lot of folks that are doing it out there. As far as my contemporaries, Marcus Cosby, Howard John Wesley. I mean, just killing it. And then there are those that are coming behind me. You know, so folks like you, Willie Francois, Brianna Parker, Danielle Brown. I mean, you know, it's a whole plethora of folks that are doing it. So my preaching listening ear is just really this hodgepodge or this cornucopia of different styles and flavors. Lance Watson is one of my favorite preachers. Charles Adams,
Yes, sir.
you know, and I can appreciate those who preach by manuscript as well as those who preach without one.
Right.
So, you know, those are the different streams or tributaries that I drink from when it comes to the preaching moment. But also at the same time, the Lord has allowed for me to be very comfortable with my own voice.
Absolutely.
Which, interestingly, I did not really come into until I was about 35, 36 years old.
My goodness.
And so, you know, I'm cool with my own, but I am cool when my Mississippi slips out.
Yes, sir.
The preachers that have influenced me, of course, is Charles Booth, Charles Adams, Samuel DeWitt Proctor, H. Beecher Hicks, Lance Watson, because I'm a manuscript preacher, and because of how they do it.
Legends.
But then also at the same time, you know, I listen to John Guns, or I listen to Frank Thomas, and I'm just like, "Ooh, Lord, why you didn't give that to me?" So you become comfortable in your own skin. You become comfortable with your own voice. You become comfortable with how you do what you do, because as P.T. Forsyth says, preaching is truth through personality, and it has to be your personality, not somebody else. It has to be your personality. So that's where I am, and of course, I'm a Proctor fanatic as far as methodology is concerned. That's the homiletical handles. And he lays it out so beautifully in his book, The Certain Sound of a Trumpet. And if anyone that is listening to this podcast, if you don't have that book, you need to get that book in your library. And even if you don't use that methodology, it could give you some great insight, and it has some wonderful nuggets as far as that's concerned. Another person that I lift up is Dr. Martha Simmons, who has written a lot of books, she and Dr. Thomas, as well as she on her own. But I will also suggest that if you can find it in print, getting the anthology Sacred Fire, which is an anthology of Black preaching in America from the days of slavery up until the current time, and become a voracious reader.
Yes, sir. So you said anthology of
anthology of African American preaching.
Okay, and who wrote that one?
Martha Simmons and Frank Thomas. It is the North Anthology on African preaching.
We'll definitely make sure we get those. But listen, Dr. Scott, I appreciate it so much. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for this interview. Like I said, you've been a blessing to so many like myself. So I'm appreciate me and Dr. Scott. We talk about, sometimes we go back and forth on Twitter talking about sports because he's just such a cool dude. So I thank you, Dr. Scott, so much for just sharing this time with us today. Is there anything else you want to get off your heart before we close?
Well, I'm very, very hopeful. You all have tools that I didn't have when I was coming up. And technology gives you access to some great things as far as particularly preaching and even pastoring may be concerned. And so use those tools, but do not allow for those tools to become your idol. And people like you and others who take this work, particularly the pastorate, seriously, it gives me great hope. There are some who want to have shortcuts, and when you do the Lord's work, there are no shortcuts. Moses was in the wilderness for 40 years before he heard from the Lord.
Yes, sir.
And then he had to deal another 40 years with crazy, cantankerous Israelites.
Yes, sir.
So the preparation for whatever the Lord has for you oftentimes is done in obscurity, so that whatever mistakes you make won't kill you.
Yes, sir.
The light is on you.
Yes,
and
sir.
You mess up.
Yes, sir.
Folks aren't quick to forgive.
Yes, sir. Well, like I said, thank you so much. Just stay on for one quick second because I'm going to end this. But like I said, thank you all so much for watching. You can go back and watch it. It'll be rebroadcast tonight. God bless you. God keep you. Thank you.